exhibition room that Juan Antonio Suárez will provide us, and we'll engage into a conversation with you, and later on open it to the floor. So please.
Thank you.
Please use the microphone, by the way.
Hello. The Bruce High Quality Foundation was founded in New York on September 11th, 2001. The foundation's mission statement reads as follows. The Bruce High Quality Foundation, the official arbiter of the estate of Bruce High Quality, is dedicated to the preservation of the legacy of the late social sculptor Bruce High Quality. In the spirit of the life and work of Bruce High Quality, we aspire to invest the experience with wonder, to resurrect art history from the bowels of despair, and to impregnate the institutions of art with the joy of man's desiring. Professional challenges, amateur solutions. Known for blending irreverent humor, art history, and a pointed critique of the art world, BHQF has used the ever-expanding attention paid to their work to take on bigger and bigger problems in the art world. Public Sculpture Tackle. This ongoing project documents the Foundation's response to the status quo of so-called public art by taking literally the concept of defensive design. Beyond Pastoral. Installed at Exit Art in New York, directly across from a BP gas station, the Foundation built a 1/5 scale replica of the station. Then, in the same manner as a potato clock, the Foundation produced electricity for the model from 7,000 lemons and limes, arranged in the shape of BP's logo. Within a few days, the fruit began to rot, and the Environmental Protection Agency ordered the fruit removed, producing through the work a microcosm of larger corporate environmental greenwashing. BHQFU. On September 11th, 2009, the Foundation opened the doors of the Bruce High Quality Foundation University, a free, unaccredited university of the arts in Manhattan. The university is non-hierarchical, with no distinctions made between students, teachers, or administrators. It is self-organizing, managed through an open monthly meeting where anyone can propose new classes. BHQFU currently houses 11 classes with over 100 participants weekly. We like America, and America likes us. Recently, the Foundation was selected for the Whitney Biennial 2010. For their project, they made a work titled, We Like America, and America Likes Us. The title refers to a performance by Joseph Beuys, I Like America, and America Likes Me, where the artist was transported by hearse ambulance from the airport to the gallery, where he lived with a coyote for several days. The Foundation installed the hearse ambulance in the gallery, projecting a video of found footage, YouTube clips, news, Hollywood, with a voiceover narrative describing a relationship with America in personal terms, shifting genders and contexts. The work creates an interplay between private feelings and notions of national identity. The hearse ambulance allegorizing the tension between American fatalism and her possible salvation. Brucennial 2010, Miseducation. Simultaneous with the Whitney Biennial, the Foundation organized the Brucennial 2010, Miseducation, in an unused storefront space in downtown Manhattan. Doing away with curatorial and institutional prerogative, the exhibition was organized, curated, and managed by its over 300 participating artists. Sunless. For their contribution to Cannibal Dominoes, the Foundation has chosen to allegorize the exhibition's concept by making an installation that deals with the physicality of memory and loss. Driving from Paris to Murcia, the Foundation collected memories, footage, a subtle smell of jasmine sensed at a rest stop, a lost cat. The concept is based on Chris Marker's 1982 film, Sans Soleil, wherein Marker uses a form of travel diary to meditate on the personal and political significance of memory and forgetting. One key site on the Foundation's trip was Port Boo, the border crossing where Walter Benjamin committed suicide. The Foundation was drawn to the connection between Marker's and Benjamin's ideas of subjectivity and historical memory. In the words of Theodor Adorno, Sunless attempts to convey, quote, the irretrievability of what once lost congeals into an allegory of its own demise. Or in the words of Chris Marker, quote, if they don't see happiness in the picture, at least they'll see the black, end quote. So that's our presentation of things that we've done and what we did here in Murcia.
So now I'll ask Juan Antonio Suárez to give us a first take on the intervention here, and we'll show us some footage of it afterwards.
Okay, great. Just a small correction. I wanted to say that quizá lo puedo hacer en español, que no estoy afiliado con el Cendeac, sino con la Universidad de Murcia, pero esto es un detalle muy, muy pequeño. Okay. Anyway, I had thought of, instead of giving some sort of commentary about this, asking Bruce High Quality Foundation to make some comments about the work that they've done beyond perhaps, the excerpt, that the description that you've just provided us with. I had in mind particularly two issues. One of them was how you conceived the dialogue, since the show was partly conceived as a dialogue between succeeding interventions. How you figured out a dialogue with the preceding interventions by Jimmy Durham, Christina Lucas. How this comes into place as a third. As a third step in the series, in the Domino series. I thought, I would be quite curious to, see what you have to say about that. Even if, what you say is like, well, we didn't want any dialogue, or we're not engaging with previous, interventions. Because I was struck by a certain sort of minimal quality of your intervention. I was also wondering about because Jimmy Durham started the Cannibal Dominoes with this idea of bringing the profane, what is traditionally, out of bounds in sacred spaces like the church or the museum, bringing in the profane, the other, basically garbage, construction materials, this kind of formless matter, and sort of cluttering up the space. And you've given us a beautiful, really, a very minimalist, very sort of streamlined intervention, that sort of vectoralizes the space, gives it a sort of a very specific direction, or perhaps two, one, in the, moving toward the screen, the tarmac, the tar on the floor, and perhaps a horizontal direction, which is the movement of the images on the screen, which are, travel images. Therefore, there's a constant sort of motion across, transversal to, to the direction of the tarmac. This would be something that, if you want to talk about, I think, might be really interesting for all of us to hear about. And there was a second issue that struck me about your project for Murcia. And I must say, before I continue, that is really a truly wonderful, I thoroughly enjoyed it yesterday. I was totally hypnotized by the whole installation and by the video as well. But it struck me a little bit, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, as something a little bit different from your usual work, in that, I mean, I didn't see as much humor as you usually inject into your work, which I must say is wonderfully humorous. This I found a little bit more lyrical or melancholy, and so I found a slight shift in tone in relation to your usual, more kind of jocular work. Again, I don't know if you have anything to say about that. I was wondering to what extent, your dialogue, because all your work is to a certain extent a dialogue with previous work, and this is in some ways a dialogue with, as you just said, with Chris Marker's Sans Soleil film. And Sans Soleil is a very melancholy document in some ways, and I saw a certain melancholia here, but maybe I'm totally wrong. So please tell me that I am, or say something.
No, it's sad.
It's sad.
We're just getting old.
You need to use microphone only.
Oh, it's sad. We're getting old. So there's a few questions. We could answer these, or should we save watching a little bit of the movie?
As you
or should
decide,
we
you
do
can
it
do
now?
it. Why don't you put it and you can probably speak over it?
Okay. Maybe we'll leave it on because you get the idea, and it's 25 minutes. I'll leave it on if hopefully it won't be too distracting. So the two questions that you asked were first about the continuity of the show, about the erasure of the previous two shows, and how we understood the kind of overall project of the show and how we see ours fitting into that. And the other was about humor. So I think that for us, it was obviously difficult because we, understood the shows through the kind of internet documentation that the shows had, and we weren't able to come and really experience them. Our investment in seeing ourselves, in this trajectory of different artists, I think was more about kind of trying to create a show that was a metaphor for the possibilities of the project, and kind of immediately undermining the idea that for there to be continuity in the shows, there had to be the same physical matter from show to show to show to show. Our understanding of the first two shows was kind of very rooted in an idea that Jimmy had done a show that was a very kind of personal, it was very much about his personal experience of coming to Murcia and collecting artifacts and collecting observations and then presenting those, and that there had been a certain kind of reaction to that was, to some extent a negative reaction, and that Christina had done an exhibition that very much addressed his show. It was a kind of call and response almost, insofar as the show was understood publicly. And we kind of wanted to do something that in a completely, totalistic way kind of prevent a challenge to the artists who had been before, because it's a challenge to that work to eradicate it, but also a provocation to the future artists who came. It was obviously the first decision that we made upon being here, but I think Yeah, I don't know if that answers it. Anything to add?
That's a pretty good answer.
The relationship to humor is, I mean, I think it's, for us, it's coming to a place that you don't really understand the history of makes humor. I mean, humor is always the last thing, right, that you get in another language. I mean, that's how I feel, at least, even when I'm, speaking to people in English who come to English as a second language. I always feel like humor is the hardest thing to latch onto. And a lot of the way that we've used humor throughout our work is kind of, it's very much about, well, there's on one level, there's mockery, which is just something you need to do sometimes to get through the day, I think, and it kind of like the utilization of humor is there to some extent to provide levity for this really kind of pointed criticality. And it's really hard to incorporate humor in a culture that you don't understand, and in a place where you don't understand how the institutions work and what the institutions are providing and what they aren't providing. It's just really hard to mount a critique in that kind of situation. And I think our relationship to humor has always kind of been rooted in our desire to, kind of ridicule the things that institutions do and the kind of attitudes that people have that are not, productive at all. So, I don't know, humor is hard. It's hard to do humor in a place that you don't know. And one of the challenges of doing this show is obviously coming to a place where you don't understand what the audience is. And that's a kind of challenge, I think, that artists are presented with when they participate in a international art world, where you're asked to come and do a show in a place that you've never been before. If that makes sense.
There's still a bit of a joke in being the first Americans who come in as the Americans and pave the church. That seemed funny. I mean, ideally that's not the first read. I mean, I think that the way that you described it was more important to us, creating a space that was in some ways more solemn or melancholic. But there is we could have used another material, but I think that the paving a church has a very American quality to it, and that's definitely like the feeling you have anytime going to do a show that's sort of an international grab bag exhibition. It's like you suddenly become American when you're not in the United States.
And also the introduction of a cat inhabiting the space for the duration of this month is also, I don't know if you saw it when you were at the show, but having a cat inhabit the space for the duration of the show is also a reference to Chris Marker, and but also
I couldn't hear that last part, sorry.
I thought it was funny.
I thought it was funny.
I just like it.
Okay. Well, I thought the tar, the asphalt, also connects totally with the travel quality of the. I mean, obviously, but that's a very obvious connection.
We're trying to be minimalist artists. We're trying really hard to embrace minimalism, and we're making other work that's kind of appropriates the look and feel of minimalism in a really kind of completely underhanded way, a completely roundabout way. I mean, for us, this project we're doing a project in New York right now, a show that's opening on the 20th. That's a pedestal exchange program. So it's a room with a grid of freshly made pedestals like you'd have in art schools. they're in this kind of brutalistic, grid that's kind of reminiscent of the, Berlin, the Holocaust monument in Berlin, like very kind of austere. But we're gonna run it as a pedestal exchange program, so schools can come and exchange their shitty, paint splattered, broken pedestals for new pedestals. So it very much has this kind of really surface reference to minimalism with utilitarianism and humor in a way that's not at all related. So we're trying to be formalists,
Right.
really hard.
Well, part-time formalists, I guess. Yeah, and it's from this project. You said that it was in PS1, right? The pedestal exchange. There is an amount of institutional critique, institutional play that comes to mind right now that you don't use particularly here in this Murcia project. Your Murcia project seems as if you suddenly. Maybe I sound silly saying it like this, but as if you suddenly have become kind of respectful of the institution, maybe for the first time in your lives, with the sort of exhibition space, with the actual dynamics of showing a work. Is that the church environment that suddenly made you reverent?
Brought out the Catholicism and all.
Are you implying that they were trying to be respectful to the church? That the problem was that they cannot.
He's a really vicious cat.
It's a religious cat.
Vicious. Yeah.
Oh, vicious.
He's going to cause a lot of damage.
I don't know. I think. We've never thought of ourselves as institutional critique. There's a lot of things that we've done and a lot of shows that we've done. That in ways that are a lot less related to a critique of the institution, like participate in like exhibition, culture and literacy. We make lots of sculpture, we make films and things that we're, really invested in understanding those things discreetly and not just as like props in a big, bigger kind of critique of institutions. So I think we're interested in operating in different kind of spheres and in keeping the kind of art making practice as the front and center preoccupation and just trying to make good shows. It's never a criteria of whether something fulfills a critique of the institution. I think that we always think long and hard about what the specifics of a place are that we're going to do a show, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is polemical to the institution automatically. It just means that you have thought about it, So, I think that this show, in the way that this show eradicated, or whatever word you want to use, there are more strong and less strong words for what we did. But I think in the way that we did that, it was, within the context of this show, something that is provocative.
No, it is. I didn't mean to say that you were not in any way, or that you guys are growing old and soft. I was not trying to say that, but there is there's a certain, you were more subdued. I was thinking, in terms of engaging with the space and with the, with the dynamics of exhibition and stuff.
It's a really formal show. It's a show. We've rarely done anything so simple and so kind of austere and pared down. And I think, tried to make something that was also beautiful. We're really invested in beauty, but
yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting thing that you guys say this, because your work, I think, is beautiful. It really works at various levels. And anyway, I don't know if you want to keep talking about this,
I
or
was
or
probably trying to jump in, just to expand on what Juan Antonio was arguing, that nonetheless there's a very serious drama here, because you're basically touching on at least four very, very melancholic questions. One is the erasure of the memory of the Civil War, and somehow the difficulty of locating the traces of that story in the contemporary experience of the land, all the way from Paris to Murcia. Second issue, of course, is the modern tragedy of critical theory, which is the death of Benjamin, and actually making that stop over, in particular, has to do with actually bringing this loss right into a show that had somehow been dealing in the previous installments with a certain Benjaminian code, because the questions of profanity and artistic erotic production and the transition from art to religion are the Benjaminian diagram, and those were the things that somehow both Jimmy Durham and Christina Lucas were trying to activate. So bringing Benjamin's death, and that's the reason why I was convinced the first time you made the argument. I remember saying, well, that makes sense because of that chain of arguments. But there's also a third element that, of course, is markers, continuous effort to produce a certain memento of the failure of film as an instrument of historical recording and as an instrument of understanding. I mean, it is. I think the markers is particularly incredible in terms of actually challenging film to do the recording of its own ability to properly record, and all that comes together with the final decision of actually getting rid of the chain of production that we have here. So somehow the question that Juan Antonio was making still stands. There's beyond, unless you actually have gone so German so as to think that beauty has to be born out of
Trauma.
and decaying flowers.
That's a good idea.
Unless you're really delving into that Germanic strain, one has to say that there is a choice here that you actually came to experience work of dealing with death in different stages of the show. I mean, that has to be probably taken into account. I think that is something I felt very comfortable with, that there was all these I'm losing my English here, duelo. How can I put
Mourning.
it? This morning in the whole of the project. But I think that is something that has to be discussed. I mean, why is it that I know that we've been joking the whole day that in English Spain sounds like is Spain, but beyond that fact that this is Spain, why is it that you have to deal with these painful elements? I don't think that even the Godard, the remake of Godard, had that level of feeling of loss. That there's something really specific in this story, or it's really simply that you're part of Benjamin's widows, and that's the problem.
Yeah, we're just diehard ideological Walter Benjamin clones. Talk about mourning. Is that
somehow? Yeah. Why is it that you decided to talk about mourning? Why is it that you have to be mourning? I mean, beautifully.
Oh, that's a really personal question. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about that here. I mean,
I'm not talking about the castration complex. I'm talking about something real.
I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something that's really so new for us. I mean, I think maybe it's found, and part of it is being in this setting and the curatorial project fitting really well with our idea for what to contribute to the show. But I think that relationships to memory and the fact of loss being built into how future things are produced is actually something that we've been dealing with from the beginning. I mean, that's the entire history of the Bruce Lee Quality Foundation, is to begin with loss, to begin with the absence. The idea is that we've always been working backwards. The death is the beginning, and everything since then is just made up.
Mm-hmm. So it has to do with the idea that your task is a task about a certain inheritance.
Yeah, we essentially are responsible for creating and maintaining the legacy of something that doesn't exist, which maybe it never actually exists, and that's, I mean, if there's anything that I would hope we'd be pointing out through that, sort of constantly returning to that originating myth, is that this, in this case, like, our myth is actually just a big puppet head. I mean, it should be pretty clear that it's fake. But the task of sort of trying to build something from nothing, it begins with there is a sense of loss, even if it's incredibly goofy sometimes. In this case, it's just not so goofy, but it's still trying to start from nowhere. So I think everyone has some sort of moment in the creative process where you feel like you are nowhere.
I mean, just to go back to that sense of pilgrimage, I guess that it was interesting that at one point during the last 2 days, when we started, there was somebody, I think Ferran Baranville, that brought up the question of how morbid we are in terms of visiting people's, of visiting people's graves. I mean, that kind of sport of going to the burial site of certain heroes. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you had this need to go to Portobou. How do you pronounce it? Portobou. In a certain way, I guess that the question that I would like to ask, because that's a very, very important part of the film. I have my impression of it, because I also probably had at one point the temptation of doing that pilgrimage, is what is the tension between your expectation of visiting that place and actually having been there? I mean, what is it that you expected to find? What kind of ghost were you looking for? And what was the pile of trash that you actually faced? What's the difference between those, the attempt to retrieve this loss and the encounter with the monument?
It's in there. I mean, well, I mean, I don't know. It's an incredibly, it's actually a really effective monument. It's really moving. I mean, in a way, I think it's like clearly an experience where you fulfill. I mean, for me at least, I wasn't that. There was nothing there that surprised me. I mean, it kind of fulfilled like a certain grim, kind of heavy thing in its ambiguity. I mean, it's this little kind of town, this murky little town, and the monument is actually quite well designed. I mean, it's, in a way, it's guaranteed to be like a non-event, or like an anti-event, because that's so much of what his death is. I mean, I think it's actually the ultimate tourist destination for people like us, because it is a monument to the kind of like dissatisfaction that you're guaranteed to have at tourist destinations. And we were clearly tourists there. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And, you know, have been tourists on this whole trip. But the total just weird tragedy of his life is, I mean, there's obviously no catharsis there. So going to see this monument that was kind of poignant, but ultimately not revelatory at all, seemed like exactly what was supposed to happen. I mean, not to be trite about it, but I don't know.
And what about the rest of the quest? The question of these memories that are not in the place. I mean, because you've been carrying these photographs. I think that A gesture that I find particularly interesting is finding the photographs that are part of a certain tourist structure of monumentalization on the road, and a photograph of looks like a Spanish woman in the 30s, like a pornographic image that you seem to be carrying with you in the space. So what is this woman that is actually showing the breast?
That's in Dali's house.
Oh, it is in Dali's house.
But what there were other things that happened that Portbou surprised me with, or surprised us with, that were kind of, it was also, there was a space that was a sort of monument to the post sort of EU Euro economy, like the border, the checkpoint, which was abandoned, and you had all the souvenir shop that was also abandoned. The whole economy around that border crossing is kind of left in abandonment there. And you see like the bank, the chain, the place, the currency exchange place also closed, and just kind of like abandoned in a sort of one day to the next looking kind of way, and it becomes this monument for that whole transition. And it's also the place where, you had refugees fleeing France from Vichy, France, and before that, the Spanish, Republicans fleeing in the opposite direction. So, and there are monuments. There's a Franco monument that he built there as a way of trying to revisionist history kind of thing. That it's actually the most pathetic monument I've ever seen. It's like a stone that's maybe 4 feet tall just on the side of a hill. It really doesn't look like anything. So you don't really understand like how he felt that was kind of, was just more of a gesture, I guess. But those were all things that, were somewhat unexpected. There was a monument to the refugees at the border as well, with the images that you see in the video. And I don't know.
But it's all just tourism. For us, there's no real understanding of what the history actually is, and there's no.
Sure.
It's, I think the movie is totally framed to be just what it is, which is a trip, and it's, it's like tourism, the way that the camera, you can always when a camera is just kind of wandering around and you can tell exactly what someone thinks is interesting. It's like you're looking around and then you see something and it zooms in and you understand immediately what that person who had the camera was interested by and what their thought process was. I think all this footage does that. And even though this footage is shot by different people and it isn't in a document of one person's memories, it's not actually memories, it's the representation of memory. But it's also, the investment with history is extremely kind of, other than the trip to Benjamin's grave, is kind of all somewhat coincidental. The people who were shooting it could have just not been interested in that and interested in dog walking across the street at some point, that's what monuments like that get reduced to. It's just whether you choose to focus on it.
Right. No, but I think it's extremely perceptive that you chose to focus on it. There's not the dog walking through the street, but there are the pictures of the lines of refugees, which is very interesting because that, or you may not know that we are in the middle of a raging debate about, what to do with the memories of the Civil War, what to do with the people who were killed and buried in, mass graves, and, there's a movement for, digging up the graves, bringing people back, working through a lot of these very traumatic memories. There is also a big contingent in the country that thinks that we've worked enough through that. There's no need to, do any more therapy about the Civil War. So I think it's interesting that you really kind of connected, you tuned into a sort of neuralgic, into a sort of nodal, into a node of pain and kind of concern currently. Did that make sense? So you actually tuned into, intuitively, touristily, as you said, but it's really, you really were onto something, and I was really sort of impressed by that watching the film yesterday.
The best idea I've seen for a memorial monument lately was a proposal to build a giant robot Michael Jackson casino hotel in Las Vegas. It's like huge, it's like the entire building looks like a robot version of Michael Jackson. And that seems like that would work. Like people would keep going to that and they would probably have a lot to think about while they were there. So maybe they could make one of those for the Spanish Civil War.
I would go for it.
Sounds like a great way to managing loss. Let me just ask you one thing that I think is something that intrigues me a lot. You have achieved a relatively important reputation and position doing something that is impossible outside of New York. What I mean is that you kept yourselves local. It's very interesting that, maybe you don't notice how weird it is for anybody else around the world, but
No, that's why we all moved to New York.
yeah, you are, okay.
Not to,
You manage, it's interesting that somehow you're starting your international career now, having had this time of brewing and working in this local structure. That's a luxury that the others don't necessarily have. Actually getting out, like Benjamin, what is the starting point? And it is interesting that you're dealing with the touristic moment of artistic production in relation to that trip. Because a classical accusation against biennialesque structures is precisely the idea of a superficiality of a touristic, splash. That all these artists come here just to enjoy drinks and they do something superficial to fill up the task. Somehow, my question has to do with the fact of, you think that there would be a way to have the structure of Brooks High Quality Foundation survive that process? How you felt like that adjustment? I feel that maybe the melancholy has to do with the fact that you're actually moving outside of your territory in a certain way. Even if Godard is part of New York territory, it is a mental footnote that you can play probably better in New York than in France. But in a certain way.
Yeah, I don't think that movie would have worked in France.
I thought it was a major blockbuster. But the real question is, how do you feel within that structure? It's interesting that this is a biennial in the classical sense that most people experience for you than something like the Whitney Biennial that is like having the local biennial that is just American.
I think it's about, I think for us, it's like a classic form content, art making question. I think you can go to a place and be there for a very limited amount of time and not know that much about it, and not feel that connected to the community if you're doing something that lends itself to that. Like this film, we went to commercial art fair in Miami, Art Basel, and made a film that was kind of this fake Jean-Luc Godard, super pretentious, beautiful black and white movie with really bad acting and a terrible script and lots of pretentious Marxist jargon, but like super beautiful. And that was a project where it made a lot of sense to it was like, going there and being there and being completely out of your element and running around with movie cameras. And that worked, I think, in our estimation of how successful things we've done have been in the past, I think that was a really great example of traveling, because it was really gauged to do that. And I think there have been times when it's too easy to say that you just need time somewhere, because you can go to places and have a very cursory relationship to them. But if you're clear about that and are doing work that's appropriate to that, then it can be good. It can be okay. I think what's problematic is, when you're unable to connect with the format of your travel and the way that work fits into that. I mean, is there I don't know, maybe there's nothing necessarily wrong with a bunch of artists descending on a local economy and sitting in a swimming pool and drinking cocktails. Maybe there's something that could, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, we're going to Havana next year, but anyway, you
I mean, I'm not trying to be, complacent with it. There has to be a way to leave, your home and make work. And there are different kinds of work. People ask, a lot of people have contacted us and asked us to bring the school somewhere for a long weekend. And that doesn't make any sense, because the school is not about us getting up in front of a group of people and teaching. The school is about creating an infrastructure for groups of people to get together and have conversations and make work. And there's no way to transport that. And it doesn't make sense to pimp that out just to do an art fair, to be in the special projects section of an art fair for a weekend. It doesn't make any sense. So that's but maybe there's a way to do it that it could make sense. I mean, I don't know. But it doesn't make sense just to transplant everything and act like it functions the same way. That's for sure.
So the school, this is a question I had actually. The school actually works. I mean, you guys do meets. It's not a concept.
It's a real school. It's not a real school. It's not an art exhibition.
Okay.
It's like a school.
Or
it sounds as if you don't trust them.
Oh no!
A lot of people when they
trust them.
when we first started talking about the school, and a lot of people when they first hear about the school, there is a degree. I'm not accusing you of this, but there's a degree of skepticism. People want to make sure that they're not being taken in as subject material for some big conceptual joke, it's a school, but really it's an exhibition that represents education or something. But the school is a real thing, and I mean, I guess we could talk about how it's organized and stuff, but it's basically it's a building in Tribeca where a meeting happens once a month now, where kind of all the administrative stuff gets fleshed out and people propose classes. And then those classes meet during the week. People that are more involved in the art making of the foundation are more and less involved in specific classes. There are classes go on that no one sitting at this table is personally involved in, and there are things that we've helped run. So basically it's a, kind of collaborative, it's infrastructure for collaboration. That's what the school is.
I don't know if you agree, we should probably open it to the... ¿Tiene alguna pregunta que quisieran hacer para continuar la discusión? ¿Habrá alguna?
I thought maybe the translator was just going to start asking us questions. Thought maybe the translator would have some good questions.
¿La regreso yo? Okay, I basically am still intrigued by your, I mean, I set a number of rules that are not strict, but one rule was that I was going to enter in a dialogue with the artist rather than trying to direct their choices. And I knew that one possible moment in the show was that somebody would basically intervene so as to produce a moment of start over. But I was not expecting you to do it. I mean, I have to basically admit that you caught me somehow with my pants down, because I was actually thinking that there would be somebody else in the line that would actually make the black blank move.
Well, historically, we've been, real recyclers.
Right. Exactly.
So I can understand why.
I was basically thinking that I was going to be saved by you recycling rather than shifting the direction. So somehow that is probably an issue that I would like to discuss with you. I mean, you were totally aware of my prejudice because I actually spell it out. I told you. I mean, one of the reasons I'm thinking on you is precisely the fact that you are always encroaching on somebody else's story or structure. So then it is natural to your practice to actually operate in something like this. So were you reacting against that? Was that part of you were actually trying to
Like
sabotage?
like teenagers?
Like teenagers, yeah.
No. I mean, I obviously, it's obviously been provocative. We got to meet, and probably not all of the artists are going to have this opportunity, but we got to meet and talk to the artist who's coming after us, who's, completely, extremely kind of interested in why we had, obliterated the memory of several artists off the face of the planet. Kendall Gears. And that seemed like a good thing. I mean, it seemed like a good thing that he was on the, verge of being kind of upset. Or, that he felt like it was, a divisive gesture, divisive to the show. And it does seem like the kind of gesture that would just be the elephant in the room throughout this whole show, potentially, and doing it, I guess, is kind of like, maybe it is kind of like teenager. I don't know. Like, don't push that button. Don't push that button.
I'm going to push it a little further. Actually, the phrase that Kendall spelled was, so you thought that you were thinking a little bit like an American landing in Baghdad to start over.
Yeah.
But there's something about that playing the American that you
call it the nuclear option.
It's the nuclear option, yeah. And it's like the Marshall Plan. But but I feel that there's something that is not I don't feel like that. I mean, I actually feel like there was a change of direction that has a little bit to do with the idea that there's a moment when you need to trace back from the question that Cristina had put. That was very hard to imagine that you could develop after following the route that Cristina Lucas had built just on recycling. You had to do something very, very different. Was it really determined by what Cristina did? I mean, did you spend some time in thinking in other options and you decide to have this blunt alternative?
I mean, we went through so many different options for what this show could be, and we really didn't have. I mean, even when we arrived here, which was 10 days ago, this show, we were thinking about it in a completely different way, and to some extent, the constraints of the space dictated terms. I think, there were things that we had wanted to do at some point that if we had been able to do them, it probably would have been a different show. And I think it's fine, I think it's fine that we weren't able to, but the show became very different. It kind of split off from certain lines of thinking. But this show really, I mean, it kind of wasn't at all like what it is until really the moment it got put together. So, I mean, I can't retrace the steps of how it got there. I think I personally can't do that.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would mind talking about, because you were saying about, we made the decision. Is this anything you would be willing to talk about? The procedural issues, like how you come to decisions? Does it have to be approved by everybody? Or is this something that you'd rather leave out of the discussion altogether?
Can you explain about the board and the
It's pure bureaucracy. It's art by committee, art making by committee.
By committee.
If an idea, I mean, it's just part of life, that when you're with a group of people, there are things you'll be excited about that other people aren't, and there are things they'll be excited about that you aren't. And when you work with a group, I think that something is right if it clicks for everyone, then that's the moment that you act on it. And that's, I think a lot of what for like an audience who's looking at something that was made by a group of people that isn't like obviously traceable to different people through different hands, you know? I mean, it's one thing if you look at like even an old master painting, it's like you can trace who, you know, this assistant put down, you know, the like
Polish
brown
rider
paint.
horse that is not painted by Rembrandt.
Yeah, exactly.
that.
You know? Or like, but I think especially when you see really cohesive and decisive gestures that a group of people are taking responsibility for, then it's automatically, you know that a conversation took place, and it already makes it seem like something that's existed in the public, even if it's a very limited public. So it's art by committee, and there's no. I mean, it's 90% of how we work is. It's painful.
You spoke about the elephant in the room, but I guess that the question is, do you have any idea what is it that you have set in advance for the people coming afterwards? I mean, I've been worried the whole day on what are they going to do with this poor cat? I mean, I don't think that the cat, a living thing, was part of the plan. I don't know if we need to kill it. We're going to burn it. I mean, it makes me a little bit nervous. And if it escapes, what do I do with it? If it escapes? What do you think the artist should or ought to be doing with what you left?
I'm gonna do a whole other show now. That's
Good job.
I can pay twice. You think that there's a basis? Or do you think people will need to go back and retrieve what was?
I mean, I think what's interesting about this show is making work that you don't feel attached to, in the sense that you want it preserved historically. And I think that's like a really exciting way to make work. You know, is just to be able to, I don't know, like not have to answer that question. That's for someone else to think about. You rarely get to do that when you're making work. Just make something and then let go of it completely. I mean, every time you make something and you show it or you make it public, you're kind of letting go of it, but in a very kind of conceptual way. But to actually really let go of it is interesting and rare, I think. So I'd rather not even speculate.
But I have to do something with the cat.
yeah.
You should adopt it.
I mean, I think the material decisions will be difficult, and it's, why prescribe them? Like, they can do absolutely anything. They can start over again, or they can bring stuff back, or they can bring in a car and park it there if they need to, whatever they need to do. I think the element of self-consciousness about the overall idea of the show is the one that we think will be, or hopefully is the one that doesn't get lost, the thing that actually stays.
But the question that already, I mean,
they
it
probably
came.
shouldn't kill the cat because that's just
You
wrong.
should,
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah,
make
that's
a rule
fucked
about
up.
The artists actually don't have to deal with the cat, because it's really, the cat can happily live in the space for the duration of the show. It's really whoever is in charge of cleaning up the space after the curatorial project is over, then we'll have to deal with the cat.
But
Francis is going to take the cat.
I mean, the one question that it seems like whoever comes later will need to answer is whether they want to bring things back, whether they want to not honor our decision and bring things back from before. I mean, that came up like when we were all talking.
Yeah, that's a promise I took, that I'm not going to. I mean, this is something I probably need to say, that since you brought the moment of keeping the things by subtracting them, I'm going to allow Kendall Gears to make a decision of what can be somehow brought from the grave, but just once. I'm not going to allow people afterwards to rescue anything. So it's Kendall Gears that is going to have the chance or not to actually retrieve. There's not going to be digging. I mean, secondary burial things. I've never liked them.
Yeah. Well, and this show isn't about it's not about a conversation in the sense, it's not about a conversation between the artists in the sense that it doesn't go back and forth and back and forth. You get your opportunity to do something, and there's no diplomacy in it. It's like you get your chance to do something and then it's over for you. And it's completely out of your hands, which is interesting.
Notice, no diplomacy. So, you want to say something?
I was wondering if there were any questions, because we may be monopolizing.
¿Tenemos alguna pregunta que quieren hacer?
Should we say something really fucked up and provocative? Everyone will disagree with.
¿Ninguna pregunta? Entonces, I think we can just close and so.
Maybe
thanks.
just recommend people to visit your page, because I think it's really a wonderful source for knowing your work and stuff. I also just wanted to say that it's great to not only to see the work, but to read you. I think your writing is wonderful, and the way you frame your own projects. And so anyway, just to encourage people to maybe just log on and read away, watch videos, etc.
Yeah, we have a website that we try to take care of. That's www.thebruceequalityfoundation.com. Check it out.
And of course, I've been trying to locate where to join the foundation. I never managed to.
There's no membership.
That's why.
If you work with the foundation, then you're in the foundation.
Okay.
It's a non-membership
Structure.
That's why there's not a specific amount of people, or it's its own entity, and lots and lots and lots of people have contributed to it.
And while we're here right now, there are people installing at PS1. There are people also at the school taking care of that. So this,
It's just part of the corporation.
Yeah.
Structure. Anyway, so, en todo caso, les quiero invitar el día de mañana, será a las 7, la inauguración propiamente dicha de la exhibición, a las 8. Eso es un cambio, a las 8, en la sala Verónicas. Y bueno, mil gracias. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
talk.
South Parade, red roses too. I watch them bloom.